Here, we're using something that's built into Tomcat to do authentication for us. And so it's more of a configuration-oriented approach as opposed to a custom-coded approach. So let's start by looking at the web XML file right here. So I'm going to close everything up here. Now, as an XML file, you can open it with an XML editor. If we're looking at it in class, it's a little bit easier to look at it as a text file. And every time I try to put blank lines in here, it gets removed because it's saved as an XML file. So let me just, as I talk about it, I'll put blank lines in there. So the XML file contains configuration information. Sometimes you can't get away with it, you've got to put it in here. So we have this welcome file that we talked about before, but that's what's, if you just visit the application without specifying the name of the server, it's going to run the order server for it. That's all it's saying there. Then we have this resource rep. That's, again, when I showed you how to use databases, how to configure databases for the Ajax example, this is a little snippet of XML that needs to go in the web file to configure the data source. So that's what that's for. Now we're getting into authentication. What's going on here? So this Tomcat authentication that knows how to do is based on login names, passwords, and roles. So what do you suppose is happening here? Yeah. We're basically saying there are two roles, user and admin. So we're declaring the roles. So you can log in as a user, you can log in as an admin. So that's what that is. Then you add security constraints. So this is what I mean about configuring security. So let me go all the way down to the bottom here, and let's see what we've got. So this configures a particular security constraint. Now it looks, there's a lot of stuff in there, a lot of words. What we really need is some sort of wizard to enter this, because there's not, most of the stuff in here is just XML tags. But we're just looking at it in plain text here. So let's go from the top here, security constraint, and here's a subtag. Now why do you suppose it's happening here? There's nothing happening here. What's being declared here? Well, the name of the resource is checkout, and that would be useful if we had a wizard, so it could display a name for. Maybe someone could find that wizard for me. There must be one out there. Just a display name for users that use it in an IDE or something. It's the next line, the URL pattern, that really matters. I suppose that's yeah.
Just saying this security constraint applies to anything with the checkout / whatever the URL is.
Right. So that's just saying what this security constraint applies to. So any URL that says blah 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 / checkout / something is going to be constrained by this security constraint. So what we're saying is you cannot access this URL unless you are logged in as a user or an admin. Okay? And then, so that's what that next block is. So the first block says what the constraint applies to. The next block says what roles you have to be in, what role or roles you have to be in to access it. And then this, what suppose that's saying? Transport guarantee. Wild guess. What else do we worry about when we authenticate? HTTPS, yeah. So that's just saying that the connection should be encrypted when you access it. So that's all we have to do. We just have to say these are the constraints. And Tomcat takes care of telling the browser to switch to HTTPS. It takes care of checking, obviously there's a little bit more to talk about, but it takes care of checking the users in the right role. And it takes care of checking, looking at the URL, making sure the constraint applies at all. So we don't have to go and change every page and write our own code to check constraints. We just use this framework here. And so this is going to contain the security constraint. So now that you're used to reading it, what does this say?
Login page has 2 rows and it's HTTPS.
Right. Yeah. So here's the deal. This is a little bit confusing. The way this works is if you're using a page in Tomcat and you try to browse, say to the checkout page, it's going to say, he doesn't have access to this page, and will force him to log in, force the user to log in. It'll automatically bring up a login page. I also want it to be possible to have a link just for someone to log in, so they don't have to wait. They can proactively log in instead of being only able to log in when they're forced to. And so the way I did that was I put a login constraint on this page called login. So this servlet just exists so that if you try to access it, you're forced to log in. So that's me. So I can put a login link in my code. And when you click on it, Tomcat will also force you to log in to access it. So that was just to add a way to log in explicitly. And then here's a constraint here that applies to viewing the contents of the cart, and viewing the contents of the database. For that, you have to read it in. And down here, that's a page where you can register. Okay? Now, what's different about that constraint than the other constraints we've seen? So this is where you go to register as a new user. You give your login name, your password, your real name. Right, I'm not requiring you to pick your roles. So accessing this page does not require you to be logged in, which is a good thing, because you're registering. What does it require? That it be encrypted, because you're entering your password. So you can have pages that require login that don't require encryption, or vice versa. That's what we're seeing here.
Are there other keywords for the transport guarantee besides confidential?
Yeah, there are others, and I don't remember what they are. You can, there's like browser-based authentication. And confidential is the only one to use, in my opinion. Yeah.
If you don't want it to encrypt, you just leave that constraint out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
This is the equivalent of in PHP requiring like authentication, PHP at the top of every file you want to.
Yes. Yeah. It's accomplishing the same thing. But we don't have to write the code for that method requirement. Okay. So that is all. That was managing the secure aspect, the secure access aspect. Now, the next question is: suppose that Tomcat determines that someone needs to log in. How does Tomcat do that automatically? Because Tomcat automatically generates the login page, or displays a login page for you, and checks whether they should be logged in. And this is what this is for. So the authentication method is form-based, which is what we're always going to use. And what you tell it is, you can create the JSP page, the custom JSP page. So this is the page that's displayed when their login name and password need to be collected. And this is the page that's displayed if they enter the wrong login name and password. And then this is a little bit of WebXML magic that says if the server generates error code 403, display this page instead of some generic page. And so it turns out 403 is what Tomcat generates if you log in successfully but you have a bad role. And so this lets them customize the page that the user sees if they log into a bad role. So that's all configuration right there. Now, what is missing here? What information does Tomcat not have that it would need to really log people in? It can tell when to log them in. It can tell what page to use to log them in. It can tell what page to display if they fail to log in, if they log in the wrong role. Well, if they successfully log in, they're taken to where they were headed. So the way it works is you're going somewhere, like we did in PHP, it intercepts it, it logs them in and takes them to where they were headed.
Not like the data model, how does it know?
How does it know the login names and the passwords? Yeah, they're sitting in a database somewhere. How does it know where to find them? So that's something else we need to configure. Okay, so this is just, you've got to think configuration when you do this. So let's look in context.xml for that a little bit. So here I have my regular cookie database configured. So that's just my, the user information that configures the database access for my application in general. So this has nothing to do with authentication. You know, the URL to connect with, the username, password, max active, which you need to make 2 for your shared library database, and so on. So that's just the boilerplate for that. Down here is for the authentication. And a lot of this is going to be the same. You know, this is your database driver. That just has to be there. And the rest of this is connection information to the database that contains your login names and passwords. So we're saying that my login names and passwords are in this database, which is actually the same as my original database up there. There's the login name, there's the password. That is the hashing method we're using, SHA-256. So you can, I'm saying hash the passwords. There is a table in the database called users, and users contains a column called login and a column called password that contains, and so you go to this table, that column get the login name, this table, that column get the password. And there's another table called roles, and roles will contain login name as one column. So it has to have a column with that name. It also has a column called role that contains the roles that would map individual users to a role. Yeah.
What if you want to like do salt on your?
That is a limitation to this. Every year I try to find a way to have this thing solve the passwords, and it won't do it. So, yeah. That is a bad thing about this approach. Now, it may be that there are more modern versions of this out there that I'm not aware of that do the salting. But I try to put in filters, for example, to intercept the login request and salt the password that way, but I failed at that as well. Any other questions? Okay. So, we've got time to look at a couple things more. Let's see. So we've seen how to configure all the access. So I guess let's actually look at the JSP pages that do the login. So login.jsp is right here. So remember, as part of the configuration, we provided the page that's supposed to be displayed when someone logs in. And that's what this is. So it can be whatever you want it to be, except that the action on your form has to be the special J security check. And the name of the username and password has to be J username and J password. So when this form is submitted, it's intercepted by Tomcat because of that special J security check. That's nothing you implement. Tomcat intercepts this form when it's submitted, knows how to grab out the username and the password, looks at configuration information and figures out what database to look in and how to hash things, and does the rest. And beyond that, here's this bad user. This is what's just something I displayed. If you try to log in, you have a bad username, or if you try to log in, you have the wrong role. Okay? Now, if we actually looked at the rest of the files, the servlets, to which access is restricted, what would we see in there? How would they differ from the unauthenticated versions? What security code would you see in there? None. And that's the whole point. known configuration. So you would not find any code that forced login in any of these servlets, because that's all handled by the configuration. The only thing you would find in there is custom code that decides whether or not to display a login link, for example, or whether to display a logout link, or whether to display the user's name. And the JSPs will have code that does that. It turns out there are calls you can make. There are calls in the API where you can find out whether or not the user is logged in, and if they're logged in, what username they're logged in as, and if they're logged in, what roles they're logged in as. So you can use that information to display custom links. So I think that time to show one more, so I'll show that, and then we can. Let's look at order.js. So this is my main ordering page. And let's see. So I defined a tag called GSC role that will, so it's a tag that will display its contents if the user is logged into that role as admin. And so it's just using a call in the request object to figure out whether the user is logged in as an admin. And if so, it displays that link, otherwise it doesn't. The same thing down here. This tag here will display a login link. If the user is logged in, it will display it'll display a logout link if they're logged in, it will display a login link if they're not. And there's also a call in the API to actually log someone out. You can just call that now. So except for this rather large omission of salting, which doesn't let me, it's a very workable solution that you, again, do by configuration. And for whatever reason, there's students that just gag at configuration. You know, it's not executable code, and you just got to spell everything right when it works. But it causes great grief. One other thing I'll point out before we go is Tomcat out of the box does not support HTTPS. You have to do two things to turn it on. You have to create a self-signed security certificate, and you have to change a couple lines in the configuration file for Tomcat. And I have directions on how to do that. To create a self-signed certificate, there's a tool that comes with Java JDK called KeyTool that will create the certificate for you. Just basically create an RSA key there for you. And there's a direction, I guess I haven't posted it yet, but I shall. Yeah.
Is there a reason why it doesn't support it with the box?
I think because you need a security certificate to use it. And that's something you have to create for yourself. Because if it's shipped with a security certificate, then everyone will be using the same one. Now, of course, Apache, well, we didn't do anything to Apache. I don't remember, but we didn't create a certificate for Apache, so I think Apache is just using the same self-signed certificate